the fast forward mindset was for myself, not for really anybody else, because if I am not the consumer of my own book, then I can't expect anyone else to be. So if I will not pick up this book in 20 years and still use it, then nobody else will.
Quick introduction. David Schnurman, author, The Fast Forward Mindset. It's amazing. This talk is amazing. Less of me, more of this talk. Here we go. 3, 2, 1, go. You're listening to Zack Miller Says. So, are you a fitness athlete?
I don't consider myself an athlete.
Okay, are you familiar with Strava?
It sounds familiar.
It's kind of like Map My Run, but for like the athlete.
I am familiar with it, but I use Map My Run.
Okay.
I said.
So I just recently heard a show of them. They were on a podcast, Rich Roll's podcast. I don't know if you listen to that, but they said that anyone who sweats is an athlete, which I thought was interesting. And so the cover of your book is that you running?
So ironically, if you go to Amazon right now, I don't know if you can because we're doing a podcast, I made the decision last week to take my picture off the cover. So if you go to Amazon right now, you'll see, or if you're on your phone, it's much cleaner without my photo on it. And there's a whole backstory behind that as well. And I felt it was a little distracting. Okay. So it's just, but the answer is that was me on mile 13 of the Philadelphia Marathon.
Okay. So how did you get into fitness?
So the story about how I got into marathons was, it was 2011, and I read the book The Success Principles by Jack Canfield. Have you ever read that book? The book changed my life. After I read it, I bought 100 copies and gave it to everybody.
Jack Canfield? Is that what you said?
Yeah, Jack Canfield is the guy who wrote the Chicken Soup for the Soul series.
Okay.
So everybody knows that.
So Success, what's it called?
The Success Principles. Okay. Subtitle is How to Get from Where You Are to Where You Want to Be. And there's about, 80 principles in the book. There's 2 principles in that book that literally changed my life overnight. And the one that got me to run the marathon was principle number 54, which was keep your agreements, keep your commitments. And at that time, I just had twins. And so I was, 15 pounds overweight probably, waking up every morning saying, I'm going to work out today, and not doing it, and feeling like crap about that. I was, a couple of years into my business, and I would have meetings with people and literally cancel these meetings 10 minutes beforehand all the time because I felt too busy. And at home, I would tell my wife I'd clean the dishes or clean up, and I'd fall asleep on the couch and not do it. And so I was just breaking commitments left and right. And one of the things he said in the book that really just sort of had a visceral effect on me as soon as I read it was, he gave this example of a class that he had. And in the class, everyone has to sign an agreement that says, I will not be late to class. A couple of days into the class, several people were late, and he said, you broke your agreement. And one guy says, well, it's not my fault. I can't control traffic. And Jack goes to him, what if I told you if you were late, somebody you loved would die? And of course, that's the extreme example. And he looks at him and he goes, well, if that was the case, if somebody loved would die, I would never leave the classroom. And while it's an extreme example, what it did for me and what he talks about in the book is you have a lot more control over the commitments you make than you think. And I was treating every commitment I was making like it was out of my control. Like when I would cancel meetings 10 minutes ahead of time, I'd say the employees think I'm a busy CEO, they understand. If I'd fall asleep, not do the dishes, I would think, well, my wife loves me, she understands. And when I wouldn't work out, I'd be like, well, I have twins, it's not my fault. And I just at that moment had enough, and I started not canceling appointments, started cleaning dishes, and I decided what is the hardest thing that I can think of doing as an exercise or athlete-wise in my life, and that was run the marathon. I've never run more than 3 miles at a time at that point, and so then within that week, I signed up for the Philadelphia Marathon and started the training process.
When did you race it then?
This was the first marathon I ran was in 2011.
Okay. And then after you signed up, how quickly after it was it? Like 16 weeks, 2 days?
It was 16. It was a 4.
So you had a good training.
It was the training I went down online. I downloaded Hal Higdon's training plan. And it was the training plan where and it's in a lot of this is there's a focused step in my book. And I realized the reason I was able to run the marathon was not because I was fearless. It was because I had focus. I knew the vision, which was 26.2, and I had a plan that I could follow, so I can put all of my energy into being mentally tough. And in entrepreneurship, what are we doing? We're trying to be mentally tough, trying to have a plan, and trying to be fearless at the same time. So it was really eye-opening for me. Why millions of people can run marathons.
So I like to find parallels, and I think a lot of people don't think like this. So I think you and I think very much alike in this. So business, fitness, business career, business life, a lot of these things all have similar parallels, but we don't look at them like that, right? And so very similar to you, about August of last year, I had this thing on my bucket list that said run some form of like Ironman race. Right. And around January of last year, I started working out every single day. Right. And so at this point, I'm almost at 500 days straight of working out. Right. And so I decided to sign up for an Ironman 70.3, which is basically half an Ironman in August. I'm running it in June of this year.
Wow.
Right. And the main reason is kind of what you're saying. It's like, do things that scare the living crap out of you. Do things that challenge you, because what you'll learn in that is that you can do whatever the heck you want to do.
100%.
But when you think about the fitness aspect, so many of us in the business or in our careers will say, oh, well, I don't know what to do. It's like, no, you just have to be consistent. You have to keep going. And I think it's so many people could be looking at different parts of their careers that they love or their lives that they love. And if they were to put the same sort of effort into this other thing that's challenging, it would make them a lot more, make them allow them to do a lot more things in the world than just sit around and do nothing, basically.
And here's the best part, not to be one of those people, but I believe my book, The Fast Forward Mindset, gives them the direction on how to do that.
I would hope so. I mean, that's why you're right. Someone the other day goes, I can't believe you did this shameless plug. I said, well, I didn't write this book for no one to read it. So, like, of course I did that. So at the end of 2017, you created a bunch of 2018 goals. And I was reviewing these recently. It seemed like there was maybe 8 of these. You ranked them A to F. Most of them you did not achieve, right? So knowing that you are about focus and commitment and things like that,
yep.
Why didn't you hit these goals? It seemed like the context of the post that you wrote said something like, these things take longer than you expect them to, right? But then why create goals that are unobtainable, quote unquote, in a time frame that you kind of set?
Yeah. So my biggest weakness is focus, and I'm very transparent about that, and it's also my biggest strength for many reasons. As you as an entrepreneur, as many entrepreneurs, we're very action oriented. We run on passion. We don't run on a plan. And that worked for me for a long time. I grew my business in the first 5 years from $0 to $5 million, all on action, not really a focus or a plan. And it wasn't until we started getting stagnant in our business, passion was only taking me so far. And so one of the things that I have had to realize in life and in business is you need to slow the F down the things that you think you can accomplish and try to do. And so in 2017 and in general, and still in my life, like I think I can do a lot more than I want to at any given time. So I just have my ideas and ambitions are more than I'm actually able to focus on. And so now, as I've matured and as I move forward, I look to 1 to 3 big things a year. And obviously a book is a big part of it. I'm also moving to Barcelona. That's number 2 in August. And and my business is number 3, which is just growing like hotcakes. And so at the end of the day, step 1 of the book is taking action and building confidence to do that. The way I look at things is I don't label outcomes, or I try not to label the outcomes of what happens. So just because I gave myself an F, those things didn't have the outcomes I expected, it doesn't mean it was a bad thing. I just got to keep moving forward. If you don't, because people tend to label things bad 20 times more than they label them good. And as soon as you label it bad, it becomes bad. And so how often have you heard the True Hollywood story where somebody was at their worst, right? The true hero's journey. And it was when they were at their worst or their lowest point, they built up to something bigger. And so I'm totally okay with having goals that don't work out the right way because they're all moving forward, but I'm always trying to perfect on it as well.
Well, that's that Hollywood keywords, right? They're like, oh, they were at the rock bottom and then they came back and now they're amazing. Because, of
quote unquote, they had the, a good story or some sort of like buzzword to sell in there. I think that's important, right? It's like, I don't necessarily even like the word failure, and I think failure is super overused. I think in my book, I left it in there once, but my editor had changed a bunch of words from something else that might mean failure to failure. And I'm like, no. To me, failure, most people haven't actually failed. They're really just learning throughout this whole thing, but we've glorified that word. And so even though you might have graded yourself an F or a D or a C or whatever, you were learning through that whole process. And I think that's super key. I love something that you said there. You run on passion, not on a plan. So how did you start, I don't know, grasping the idea of a plan in there, and what was the focus on there?
Yep. So the first concept of structure for me was when we talked about with the marathon. Years later, I look back to how I was successful in the marathon, and it was really clear to me there was something I was missing, very simple, but super important in all these quote unquote plans that I was making in my life. And that was real freaking dates attached to ideas that I had. Because if you don't attach dates to it, you're running on passion, not a plan. And I don't care if you hit those dates or if you don't hit those dates, but at least you have a guideline of where you're going. Because when you look to the marathon training plan, what made me able to do it is I knew every day what I was supposed to do and if I did it. And I was able to track that. And that's how I knew I had what it took. So that was on a personal level, but things changed for me on a professional level in 2015. As a business, we needed more direction, and I had gone through 3 COs in 6 years, and I couldn't go through that process anymore. So I hired a coach. His name is Mark Green. He worked at that time for an organization called Gazelles. The book is called Scaling Up. If you haven't read it, it's game changer. And the past 3 years, the number one thing that he's brought to this organization is focus. And I can tell you how he's brought that. And by bringing that focus, it's from planning, it's from goals, it's from huddles, it's from communication, and it's from slowing down what we think we can accomplish. And that's when it wasn't a coincidence when we started scaling as a business again, and we grew 30% last year. And when we were stagnant for years, it was bringing that in. So those 2 areas have transformed me as a leader. And also I'm surrounded by people on my team. My COO, for example, she's like amazing at focus, and you learn and you're inspired by how she does that as well.
Fantastic. So the business is Lawline, an online legal education, the leading online legal education business.
I like to say that, yes. So the reason I call it the leading, because here's the deal: there's no like statistic, right? I know it's the leading because we have the most courses completed, that I know, out of any other provider in the country. We have millions of courses completed. We just charge a lower price than there's a nonprofit that makes $50 million a year. If you go by revenue, you can call them the leading, but by actual amount of customers nationally and internationally who use us, we are the largest provider. How
did you come up with this idea? Were you a lawyer before?
So I was in law school when I started doing it. There's more of a backstory to that. So in law school, I started a TV show interviewing entrepreneurs. My second year. This is before
through the school.
Nope, just on cable TV, Manhattan Neighborhood Network. It's the cable networks have a agreement with the city. They give free air to anybody who wants to use it. So I had a studio there. This is before podcasting was this, and it was before YouTube. It was the first year of YouTube.
So what year roughly is this?
2006.
Okay.
It was the year YouTube started. And my goal was to figure out how to start a business within 1 year or less, because I realized at that point, law was not where I wanted to be. And I realized what I could do instead of interviewing entrepreneurs, which, by the way, what I learned from those interviews became the foundation of my success. And I'm happy to share that if you want later on. But I started interviewing attorneys and turning those into courses. And the reason I got that idea is because my dad actually tried it 6 years earlier in 1999. Or 7 years earlier, he started the business, and within 1 year after the .com crash, it sort of imploded, and he stopped it. But he always kept the URL going, and there was like 10 courses on it. So in law school, I said, what if I take that idea, take that name, and from day one say I've been around since 1999, And so I did that, and it was really the smart move because it gave us credibility right away.
And here in 2019, you're a 2-decade-old business.
There you go. So there's some confusion like in the company because sometimes we say we're from 1999, but sometimes we say we're from 2007 or 6.
It's still, I mean, think about it. 06 or 99. I mean, those are.
It's still, we're old school. Yeah, we're.
So, in 06 timeframe, you're still in law school. Do you graduate?
Correct. I graduated in 06.
Okay. And so you spent roughly how much in law school?
So, in full transparency, my father, I was lucky that they had saved money. So my dad came from nothing.
Okay.
And literally got full scholarship to his school and built up his practice. And all he ever wanted me to do was go to law school. It was the last thing, of course, I ever wanted to do because that's what he wanted. And for 6 years, I worked in sales. I was going from one sales job to the next. And all of a sudden I started to panic. This was in 2003. Oh my God, this could be the rest of my career. And at that point, I became a real estate broker. And when I studied for the real estate exam to be a broker, I really enjoyed it. And I said, you know what? I want to have a career for the next 30 years. And it's what something my father wanted me to do. And he had saved money for me from day one to do it. And it's like very few people have that opportunity. And so I am truly grateful for that because if it wasn't for that, the pressure, I totally respect the pressure that 98% of the people have to pay off their loans in school and probably would not be here today, or maybe I would be in a different way, in a different form, but it gave me less pressure to have to pay back those loans.
So what was the conversation with him like though? Because you still, in theory, followed the path that people were, right? So like, I don't, you have kids now, you said?
3 kids.
3 kids. How old are they?
10-year-old twins and a 5-year-old.
Okay. So I'm 35. When I went to school, the game was do good in high school, go to college, go get your career, build up that whole thing, build a family, whatever, right? My guess is, how old are you?
41.
Yours is pretty similar in that too, is my guess.
Yeah, correct.
Has that changed for your kids? Like, hey, you could be a business owner, you could do different things. Like, I feel like...
Look what we're doing right now. I think it's just changed for everybody. As you know, I'm sure you've seen Gary Vaynerchuk talk and on his podcast, everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. Like, it's so much easier to just, like me and you, if it wasn't for this technology, we're very similar. Like when I was growing up, the people that I was surrounded by was people I went to high school with, people I went to college with. 25 people that I know, including me and my wife, got married from meeting in college. It's not the same anymore. Now you swipe left or right or whatever that is. And so I think that the opportunities, my kids, my son, and I support it in the way he does it. He's on YouTube all the time. He's learning about space. He knows more about American history than I do because he just absorbs that. So I am totally 100% for them figuring themselves out. But my biggest fear is I'm not going to give them it's like you want to give them the right direction. I think the same way I was inspired by my dad subconsciously that he loved what he did and he owned his own business. I certainly, if that's what my kids want to be part of, I want to support that.
How did you have the conversation with your dad to not do kind of the typical law world thing?
It's really interesting because that's a good question. You do ask a good question, so I'll give you that people don't ask.
It's because I listen. I don't have a list of questions.
100%.
Right? That say, here's the 7 questions I want to ask you. I might have a couple of questions from things that I've learned about you, but like that's laziness to people. Not to go on this tangent, but like don't be lazy. Like if you want to interview someone, like ask them real questions.
100%. So it was interesting because my dad always wanted me to work in his law firm, in personal injury. I knew 100% I can never work for my dad or in personal injury, and just because of our personalities and things like that. When I decided not to become a lawyer, it was a big deal, I think, because my dad he won't admit this today, I think, because we've had this conversation, but he didn't think it was going to be successful. But he supported me because...
Even though he had been doing it, because he had technically started it with some sort of...
But it wasn't successful for them. Like, so they were making $1,000 a month. That was their revenue, and they were losing money on it. And so how I going to by myself with no money? I didn't get any money from anybody. I did. So what did I get? I got $2,500 in credit card that I can use to pay a developer to build the site from him, and I got to take his kitchen in his office, and I literally moved all the stuff out of the kitchen, and that became my office. And I literally in the beginning would have customer service calls, and lawyers would be coming in and washing their dishes in the background while I'm on the phone with customer service. And I remember he fully supported me because he said, there's no downside. You're taking something that's big. But he also at the same time said, what are you going to do when this doesn't work out? Because how are you going to support yourself? And when I was in sales, he would say to me, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with you. With that said, my dad has been the biggest support of my career, especially since I became an entrepreneur. So it's the best mix today because he is a partner in the company. He's a part owner because he said, I took the idea from them and I took that concept. And he is my biggest cheerleader now, mentor and guide. And if it wasn't for him, I 100% would not be where I am today.
It's almost like a lot of it has to do with timing, the way that you were raised, more internet-based, that has helped you, where maybe he didn't. I mean, do you think that's fair to say?
And also technology was more ahead. So when the year that he started Lawline was also the same year that Broadcast.com, which is Mark Cuban's company, sold to Yahoo for $5.7 billion. So he was on the right path. He was smart. He was just ahead of his time. In fact, he had started a TV show in 1985 called Lawline, interviewing lawyers. He was paying thousands of dollars or more to be on TV. It was on PBS. And once again, it was a great idea. He was just ahead of his time to how cheap things are now. So absolutely, I think technology, and I think in terms of my dad is again more old school. I like to execute, so I'm an executor. So at least in the beginning stages, then I like to pass it on. And so I literally what I did was I set up my third year of law school. I had 2 days of school and 3 days of working in the business. I found a development company. I built the website. I found 2 content partners. I started doing direct mail. I did it all before I graduated because I knew the day I graduated, I was going to take the bar. It'd be 3 months off to focus on the bar. And if I didn't have that set up by June, I would have to find a job. And so, and it worked out. And luckily, yeah.
But what I like about what you're saying is a lot of people, I hear a lot of, you mentioned Gary Vaynerchuk, you mentioned people that want to start a business. I call them LinkedIn founders, right? Where they just want to put on their LinkedIn account that they're a founder of a business. Doesn't mean anything really, right? To me, it's great that they can start these businesses, but a lot of them aren't really serious about it. But what I think is great about what you're talking about is not only were you in school, but it's 2006, you got a credit card out, and you weren't saying like, oh, let me find a co-founder to build this thing for me. You took that bet on yourself. You took that credit, you had that credit card, $2,500, and you put that in. And to me, like that's the grit, that's the tenacity, that's the resiliency. Even in an early stage, figuring out that, hey, I have to do this thing, and then 13 years later, things are going good for you. And so people aren't willing to make those bets. Like, where did you learn that, like, hey, like I have to do these things myself?
It's as you can hear from many entrepreneurs, it's both a blessing and a curse because you have to be able to delegate to grow and get leverage. So I generally think I can do things better in certain areas and quicker. Now I'm not involved in any of the day-to-day of our business. So I've found better people than me in many areas, and I'm still provide the value. I just feel that the best way to learn and build something is to actually roll up your sleeves and build phase 1, build phase 2, see how it feels, put that there. And then once you understand how you've done it, then you can figure out how to pass it on. That's the only way I know how to do it. And that's honestly where I get the most pleasure.
I love that word at the end, pleasure. I mean, that's so key, right? You start building these things at the end of it. You're like, when I'm done with my Ironman race, I'm going to be like, I put in a lot of work. And I don't have to do that. I don't have to challenge myself to do something like that ever again. Or maybe I do. Who knows?
Yeah, no, 100%.
So in 2006, I think the timing is correct. You're in law school. You started a TV show where you're interviewing other legal professionals.
No, it was entrepreneurs.
Other entrepreneurs. Okay.
That's, by the way, that TV show has led to all my success, and I can explain that if you want.
Okay,
later.
so I'm a firm believer that a lot of success with people is not only the things we've been talking about, it's also being a pioneer in something, right? And really establishing yourself early on in there. And so in '06, yes, there's been interview shows before in the past, but not many people are doing this in the kind of realm that you're doing it, right? And so people tell me like, hey, you're a good interviewer, hey, you're good on stage. It's like, hey, well, I've been doing this for a long time, right? It's not because like I'm just magically great at this. I've been talking in front of people for a really, really long time. I introduce myself to people. I say yes to a lot of conversations. And because of that, I have a ton of hours that has helped me become an expert in things like this. Back in '06, like, what's the genesis of doing this? Like, how do you become a pioneer in this? And you said this has led to everything successful in your life. I believe that too with myself, with, raising my hand a lot. Like, give me everything with this.
So I think probably to you and to those who are listening, certain people just love asking questions to others and hearing their stories. I've always loved I'm the same person as you, literally since day one. Whenever I could think about it, I always just like understanding what your story is and what makes you tick and how you exist. And I've always been obsessed when I want to learn something, I just ask a lot of questions. And so it just was very natural for me. One of the first interviews that I did was with Simon Sinek. I don't know if you know who Simon Sinek is. The book Start With Why. He's done TED Talks. And
this is in '06.
'06. This is before his TED Talks, before his book. And it's still actually, I think, I haven't touched this in a while. I think if you go to TrueNYCcom, it's like the featured interview because he's famous now. So I keep it there. And he after that interview, and he said to me, he called me. He's like, "Can I have the video of that? Because that's the best interview I've ever done of sharing what the why is." And because he wanted to put it on DVD and sell it. And I couldn't figure out because I was like just busy at school, whatever. There it is. Yeah. I couldn't figure out how to do that. And so he just said, "Oh, well," and moved on. I'm like, talk about missed opportunity. But it was interviews like people with him and other entrepreneurs where I learned what I dubbed after when I look back, I called the 5 themes of success that you need to follow in entrepreneurship. And those are the themes that I followed and have helped me.
So you're interviewing him. He's a nobody at that point.
No, he's not a nobody, but he already had to start with why. He was making good money. He was definitely not a nobody because I met him through EO, an accelerator. Okay. He just wasn't as well known. So
he's not he's not a top 10 kind of person at that
Correct.
point.
It was before talk. That's what put him on the map.
Okay. So he's somebody. So how do you, when you're asking someone that might have a little bit of fame, like how do you ask them to be on a show? Is that hard? So
I just joined the accelerator program in EO where you had to be $250,000 in revenue to $1 million to see if you can. It's how they get people to join EO because you have to have $1 million or more. It was my first year, and he had come talk to our group one day, and I never heard somebody as good as him. Like I knew he was special. When I heard him talk, I'm like, wow, this guy is amazing. And I just went up to him and I said, I would love to same way we do here, but this is before. I have a TV show. I would love to interview you for it. And he's like, no, sure. And like 2 days later, he was in my office and we were doing it. And it was interesting because I knew he charged $10,000 at the time to consult. And so I sort of wanted to ask like personal questions on the interview about my business, but I didn't want to go there because it'd be too obvious. And so I just I just wanted to understand his genesis and who he was and how he came up with that. And I just dissected it, and that's how it went.
That's incredible. So, TrueNYCcom, how did that come about?
So
is that the show?
That's the show.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So and it was literally the reason I called it True NYC. I literally bought the email address 5 years earlier just because I liked the name, and I was like, all right, I'll turn this into the name of the show.
And then you were able to get free cable time because someone in New York City said, here's a spot. Like, how does that work?
So it's called Manhattan Neighborhood Network.
Okay.
And I think it still exists. That they have a couple of channels in New York that anybody can apply to be a producer. You just have to live in Manhattan. And so by the way, at the same time, I also put them all online too. So I hired my first website designer for $250. And I met him at a Starbucks in New York, and he built a very basic site. Again, there was no freaking easy way to upload things to YouTube. Like, it just wasn't intuitive.
Right.
Like, that didn't exist. I would have never done it if YouTube. I would have got YouTube. I would have embedded the link, and there was no WordPress. It just wasn't there the way it is today. And
same with podcast, right? I remember trying to start a podcast in 09, 10, 11, something like that. And it was very difficult. So I didn't do it.
Yeah.
And I wasn't smart enough at that time to think, oh, hire someone, spend $250 to do it. I just didn't do it. I had to wait a couple more years till it was easy for me to be able to upload the thing. Like, you're right, though. I mean, things, 06, geez, like, things were hard then.
You use Anchor FM now? Anchor.fm?
No, I use SoundCloud,
SoundCloud.
which is a bad mistake in itself. But
Yeah.
that's...
Fair enough.
Yeah. If I was to change it, I would probably use Libsyn. But
Okay.
I'm 300 something episodes deep now, so
It is what it is.
it is what it is. Yeah.
But look at there's a dozen options and didn't exist back then. And I was desperate because of the experiences that I had in law school made me realize it wasn't going to be what I thought it was. And I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur my entire life. When I was in middle school, I would walk into Office Depot and I would actually imagine all the stuff that I'd be buying from the shelves, whether it was calculators or binders for my business someday. That was fun to me. And I would do that kind of stuff throughout from college. I would read Entrepreneur Magazine. I would read self-help books, but I never could start something. So my biggest fear in law school was this vision I have of myself in my head as an entrepreneur true, or is that just something I'm going to be thinking about for the next 30 years?
What's something on your bucket list that you haven't done yet?
Become a pilot.
Okay, that was one of the 2018 goals.
Yeah, so
right?
I moved it to 20 by the time I'm 50.
Okay.
I'm just realistic based on everything else. So I'm 41 right now. So
like pilot certified? Like is there a specific, so there's like a certificate to do that, like some low level? I mean, are you trying to fly for American Airlines? Like, is it just get your own plane type of thing?
Recreational pilot, but be a pilot and actively be part of it. Like, look, living in New York City does not make it easy. I'm not like, I can't just drive to the local airport and start learning. So it's more of a process. If I did live in a smaller town where it was closer and just more convenient, maybe I would start sooner. So it's not in the cards. I also don't want to kill myself. That's my biggest fear of being a pilot. But it's the ultimate freedom and passion that I've always. I would if whenever I look back, and if I did not become a pilot, I would feel regret.
Sure.
But it scares the shit out of me. So.
And I love that, right? I mean, that's David Goggins. Are you familiar with him?
Of course.
You never know.
No, well, because I read Living with the CEO, and then I actually just finished listening to his book.
As did I, and I've read both as well.
I couldn't stop saying MF because he says that word.
Right.
He curses a lot in it.
He does.
I kept cursing after.
Did you read it or did you listen to it?
I listened to it.
Okay, listening was great. And I followed him for a little while too. I don't remember how I found him. Really, really interesting fellow, and interesting I use in a good way. I don't know what word to describe him because he's such an incredible human being. And so something in there that reminded me of what you were talking about is just like he talks about how when he dies, whether there's a God, I can't remember if he believes in God or whatever, right? Yep. So there's something where he says, and I think this is incredible, like there's a list of all the things that you're supposed to be. And like you're in this line, and it basically says, here are all the things that you're supposed to be. And did you do them? Did you do more than them? Did you do less than them? Right. And that's an incredible thing because you sit there and you go like, what is your legacy? Yep. Right. And I'm young, you're young. I think we're starting to think about our legacies. Right. Like, and it's like, where am I on that list? Even though I have a ton of life to live, like, am I, where are you on that? I think that's crazy stuff to think about.
So we were talking before the podcast. I'm going to a leadership training in 2 weeks, and Warren Rustad is the speaker. And I've never heard of him before, but he's pretty famous. And I'll tell you what convinced me to go see him. I watched a talk of him on YouTube, or somebody was talking about him. And what he had said in that talk was like so relevant to me. He said, people don't realize their true purpose in life generally until they're 45 years old. And then generally those people who realize their true purpose don't take action on it until they're 55. And what's amazing for me is I realized it at 40, and I'm actually already taking action on it. So I feel a step ahead of the curve. The fast forward mindset is my driving force. So I will have no regrets when let's say when I'm 60. The fast forward mindset is how to fast forward my impact on the world around me by being more fearless and focused every single day. And part of that is sharing. It was a 3-step framework that I built for myself. I spent 2 years building. The fast forward mindset was for myself, not for really anybody else, because if I am not the consumer of my own book, then I can't expect anyone else to be. So if I will not pick up this book in 20 years and still use it, then nobody else will. And so, and I know what the average statistics are. You sell 217 books on average or something, and 214 of those are your friends and family. So I truly understand that. So I had to go into it knowing if that's the case, will this book make me live a life with no regrets, right, and will it set me up? And the answer is, it was like, as you know, it was like therapy, a marathon, all rolled up in one, writing a book.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's
changed my life already.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things where you look at it and go, what have I done? Right? And can you get that in text form, audible form, whatever it is, and get it out there. And you know, I haven't read your book yet, but I'm sure it's the documentation of what you've done to be successful.
Well, so here's the thing, which is interesting, which is a different take on like the hero's journey. And the hero's journey, which we talked about, is the E! True Hollywood Story. Mm-hmm. You hit rock bottom. My book's a little bit different. So I talk about not the 90% of the time that where I was successful. I talk about the 10% of the time where I had lack of confidence or lack of focus, and how I got through it or how I didn't. But the main purpose and reason I wrote the book was I felt stuck for the past 5 years in not at the bottom, but at the top. I felt like I was stuck at my ceiling where I hit my comfort zone. I built a successful business. I live in the neighborhood of my dreams. I have a good life. I'm president of EO. I have a lot of good things. My biggest fear was over the next 20 years, nothing's going to change much because I'm comfortable. And so I had to figure out the right way and I realized it wasn't that I wanted a bigger business or more money or more accomplishments. It was I wanted to have more impact on the world around me. And once I shifted from thinking about what can I do for me to what could I do for others, that's where, when I decided to become president of EO, 3 years in a row, I was nominated and I said no. I said yes. It's when I decided to write the book after 2 years of research on this topic. And it's finally when I decided with my wife, in August, we're moving to Barcelona for the year because we want our kids to have a bigger impact and experience the world. So it's impacting me already, and so I'm using that as a case. I got to eat my own dog food.
You have to, right? So I'm interested in your thoughts on kind of social media in general, and I'll spin it like this. So over the last year, I have spent less and less time on kind of a personal page and more of a professional or branded page around myself, not really pushing a lot of content out on those personal pages. For a number of different reasons. And I've unfollowed a ton of people. So if anyone ever says anything negative or something that I don't want to see, I just unfollow it. I unfollow them. So I don't have to see that type of stuff. And I think it's because, you know, we only live once. There's only so much that we want to consume. And whenever you're putting yourself in a glimpse of having to deal with something that it's not even about agreeing or not agreeing. It's just like, this isn't going to get me to that next step. Right. And so the whole thing about surrounding yourself with 5 people, what's the saying? Like you are the 5 people you surround yourself with, something like that. Yeah. And so like, I want to surround myself with people that are resilient, that are doing incredible things. I don't want to surround myself with people who are going to take this the wrong way, but lower level people that don't want to do amazing things in their lives. Do you find yourself in similar situations where you're positioning yourself so that you can achieve those things by being with people who are more go-getters? And I don't know the exact words to use in this, but like there are people out there, like, so David Goggins, right? Incredible human being, has done incredible things. You've read his book. You learned about him through Jesse. It sounds like, are you trying to surround yourself by people like that? Or do you still kind of put yourself and not filter out kind of the people who aren't trying to change the world, if you will?
Yeah. So just to be clear, to me, it's not about changing the world. It's about changing the world around you. So if you want to just be better yourself, and you want to be, if it's just about you being in better shape, great. I'm totally for that. If it's just about you being a better father, better in your school district, so because we just have to recognize that people are built differently and have different desires, and so it's just something that I do want to change the world, but I know most people don't. So I'm okay with that. So I like to surround myself with people who are constantly growing. What's interesting is my wife and I are complete opposites in many ways, but she challenges me more than anybody else. But she's definitely afraid of public speaking. I love public speaking, but she is the best, I don't know, at detail-oriented proofreading and figuring out lists and organization. I'm the worst at that. And so to me, it's about, there's two things. One, yes, I am 100% always looking for those 5 people that I surround myself with. You always want to play like tennis with somebody who's better than you so you can keep moving forward. So it's by being president of EO, it's been such an honor and challenge for me, but it's like I have 11 entrepreneurs on my board. It's like running $1 billion company, because to get such high level people all volunteering their time on your board, you don't get that normally unless you're running they're all CEOs of top companies. So by being president of EO, by then finding people who really are where I want to be and then interviewing them or getting to know them or putting myself out there, I'm 100% doing that. If I had to answer who those 5 people are today, I don't know if I have a running list, and maybe I should. And I should have, like, who are these people that I want to get more closer to that I'm not? And it's a good opportunity. So I would want to do that.
I almost wonder if it's not necessarily 5 people, but it's 5 kind of characteristics of people that you're looking for, right? And so when that word grit, resiliency, is something that I think about a lot, right? Where it's like, hey, like, don't quit. Like, and I don't think about quitting the same way I might have like a decade ago, but it's like just push through and being around people that will talk about, hey, like, this person's been through far worse than me. Like, running another lap is nothing, right? Calling another person is nothing. This person has actually hit, that Hollywood rock bottom piece, and it's interesting to surround yourself with content, or at least around that type of stuff.
A lot of my mentors, I don't even know, because they're authors. And some of them are dead, like Dale Carnegie or Napoleon Hill. Those books were the reason I wrote a book, and it's been my North Star and I have so many more books in me. Books have 100% changed my life more than anything, more than my father, who's been so influential, more than anybody. $15 books are so impactful for me, and there's so many more out there. So it's, I have no problem. I overbuy books, and I don't read most of them, or some of them I only read a chapter, because it's like either I got the point or doesn't relate, but it's just the best ROI you can get than anything else. And so that's why I love reading and writing.
So when did books become something in your life to hit that kind of, when did you start having that kind of mindset that books are a good $20 value?
So when I was as early, I guess, I don't know, middle school,
okay,
I was obsessed with UFOs, and my parents were like, who is this kid reading book after book about UFOs? And this is, again, look at my son. What does he do? He's watching YouTube. I was reading. So there's obviously something in the DNA about wanting to learn. And so since day one, essentially. But by the way, when it comes to school, I hated like Catcher in the Rye, anything, like no interest.
Yeah.
Just this entrepreneur magazine and self-help books and biographies. I love biographies too.
It's interesting because I love learning. I love education, but the format, that schooling system, I didn't like. So I didn't really start reading until about a year ago religiously, where I'm reading probably 1 or 2 books a week, usually through audio form.
Yeah.
And it's not that I wasn't consuming content. I was just consuming them in different kind of ways. Right. And so
informal learning.
I'm reading a ton of books. I actually just went on Goodreads today just to say, here's all the books that I've read. I decided to throw in a fiction story, is what I'm reading right now. I don't know why. I just was like, let's see what happens. So it's by Dave Meltzer, The Great Escape or something like that, or The Escape Art. Like, it means nothing. It's literally something to consume while I'm riding my bike.
Yeah.
But consuming educational content can be so powerful, and I think that's great. So writing the book, you said, took 2 years of studying and analyzing all this stuff. How long did it take for you to actually kind of pull the trigger and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do?
No, I was writing it for 2 years too. So I was starting, but I rewrote it 4 times.
Okay.
It went from, I was working with a publisher. I stopped, and by the way, it wasn't like constant day after day writing. It was like I would stop for months and I'd be stuck. And then I was stuck for a couple of months. And I'm like, you know what? I just want you to ghostwrite it for me. And so we did interviews, and he gave me the draft of the ghostwriting book. I read it, and I hated it. And it wasn't necessarily his fault. It was just not my words. And he was only working on 30% of the story, not 70% that was still in my head. So I said, this is okay. And so I started rewriting it, and I sent it back to him. It took me a while. I rewrote the whole thing. It took everything I had. Like I was like literally every morning I would be waking up, and I would be like depleted. I'd send it to him, thought it was the best book in the world, and it obviously wasn't. And then he did something. So then he reframed the book, because it was kind of all over the place, and to help me with the 3 steps. So the book, I wanted to make, it's only 9 chapters and 3 steps. And it's 36,000 words, which is short for a book. So you can read it in about 3 hours or 3.5 hours, because I know how busy people are, and there's stories throughout. So hopefully you'll want to keep reading to see what happens. How does Dave F up here, or whatever that is? And then you'll say, oh, here's the learning point. And so finally we would do chapter by chapter together. And then we just kept going through the process until literally you got to stop, or you'll just keep, as you know, if you don't stop, you'll just keep rewriting it and rewriting it. So at some point you got to be, this is good enough for market. And so I forget who it was. There was a famous author, maybe you know who it is. She's like a top selling book, one of the best selling books of all time. She finally said, I told the world I would write a book. I didn't tell them I would write the best book. And so I kept saying that to myself.
I'm a firm believer in just getting things out there, right? It was actually fairly easy for me to put this together. Very different than kind of you in 2 years and back and forth. Mine was based on a webinar, so I kind of already had that material. So, had I not had that, it probably would have been a lot more difficult. And so,
I'm embarrassed to say mine was based on a 45-minute speech I did, which I could have had. I don't know. I was a perfectionist.
Don't be embarrassed. I don't think there's anything.
I'm not. To me, it was the process. It's always the process, obviously.
But what's interesting is when it first went to the editor, I get back 25,000 edits, and it's basically, I tell these people, I'm like, it's just red paper then, and people are like, oh, that's ridiculous. I'm like, yeah, but it's still all my thoughts. It's just articulated in a way that actually makes sense.
Yeah.
And even so, what's interesting is as I was doing the audio for it a few months ago, I guess, and I would find errors. I found, I think, 10 errors or something like that. Yeah. And people are like, oh, I can't believe that. I'm like, look, it's not a big deal, right? Like, what am I going to do? Like, bitch and complain about this, that I couldn't figure this, like that there's issues? Or do I just go back and be like, hey, publisher, I found these issues. The book isn't even officially out yet. Let's tweak them.
Yeah.
Right. And so things happen. Like you almost always find an issue in a book. Like it happens.
So you did the audio for your own book?
I did. Are you going to do yours?
I'm trying to decide if I'm going to or not. So I'm good at talking like this. My problem is, because I was not a good in school, reading out loud is not my specialty. I don't know if you had any tips or tricks that allowed you to do that.
So all the content that I read beforehand, and my audio engineer would say, hey, at like 3.5, 4 hours, you're going to have to stop because everything's going to go choppy. And I was like, no, I talk for a living, just like you were saying. And then every day, 3:30, 3.5, 4 hours would hit, and I couldn't talk anymore. And so I didn't voice it to match completely, so I would go on some tangents. So I think that helped.
Yeah.
And I just kind of went with the flow. It was definitely difficult. I think it was not as difficult as writing it.
Yeah.
Good lighting is important so that you can actually see. So we would constantly be moving stuff around so that we could, even though it was in a studio, it was more of a music studio. So they were mostly doing musical numbers in there. So we would have to like move around paper to figure out how to get the lighting so I could read it, make the font a lot bigger. But then just, trying to feel natural. So I would wear like gym shorts. It was fine. I think Relisting to it was interesting. It's about 6
Yeah.
hours long. I thought it was going to be like 12 hours long because, you know, you spend 24 hours like, oh, this will be super long. And it's like 6 hours. That's it. Like, come on.
Yeah.
But no, it was fun. It was cool. Took longer than I thought it would. But I would maybe just start reading out now, practicing to see if you can do that. I mean, if the book is written in more of your vernacular, in your language,
Yeah.
I personally believe that they should be narrated by the author.
Yeah. It's fair enough.
But, you know, there it is. What's something we haven't talked about that you want to talk about?
I guess it's interesting, and I've done several podcasts, and it's what's fascinating to me is we talk about my story a lot, but we never really talk about the book. And to me, that, you know, you spent all this time on the book, and I get it, because like nobody ever really wants to talk about a book, and so I guess that's the one thing that I always wonder, like, you know, because you don't want to get too teachy, like here's the 3 steps of how to do it, because nobody cares until they're reading it and gets into it. But that's the area that I always am. It's interesting to me that we never dive into sort of.
We have to tease them enough to get them to be like, oh, now go check out this link where you can buy David's book. True. Because if you tell the whole thing, people are like, well, I don't have to buy the book.
Right. It's like, oh, I know that, or whatever.
Because you want them to fall in love with you, right? To be like, oh, 100%. I like this. Go to your website, yada, yada, yada.
And I think we did enough. So to me, because it's changed my framework so much, and it is, to your point, hard to share in a 2-minute clip, a 2-minute soundbite of what it is. You know, I know how hard it is to get someone to buy a book, and actually then when they buy the book to read it. And that's what I just try to figure out. Like, I look at you, Zack, and I'm like, what will it take? Besides him saying, oh, I'll do it as a favor, like, what will it take for Zack in his head, and I'm constantly thinking about this, to be like, I need to get David's book, and I need to read it. And I haven't figured that out yet, because I'm just trying to get through that noise and being truly authentic to say, I have read hundreds of books my entire life. I know exactly how to I think I know how to make a great self-help book that will help you in entrepreneurship, and I think I did it, and it's only 3 hours. Like, I don't know, to me, that's where I just want to like scream, trust me, this is the book that's going to be helpful for you.
I think it's difficult as a guy that, like we said, I released mine 2 weeks ago. I started selling it months beforehand. I've sold, 1,200 copies that I know of at this point. You know, not millions or anything like that. It's hard. A lot of it's follow-up. A lot of it's reaching out and being like, hey.
Marathon.
And so it's... It's a hard game. A lot of it's follow-up, too. With like, you reach out to someone, you said friends and family, but I would look at those people and be like, who do you know, right? And so you mentioned Napoleon Hill and Carnegie. I woke up the other day to a review on Amazon that said this is the new version of Dale Carnegie's book, How to Influence Friends. And I was like, really? Like,
boom.
I've never even read that book, but I love that someone said that, right? Because obviously I know who he is and things like that. That's incredible. The modern day version of how to influence people. That's incredible, right? So like figuring out some of those reviews from people, those testimonials from people, and then using that because it's the credibility effect, right? So why do you work with Nike, you work with Adidas, you work with HBO? Because people say, oh, well, if they worked with them, they clearly have some sort of authority.
Do you know Hal Elrod?
It sounds very familiar.
He wrote the book The Miracle Morning.
Okay.
So I read that in 2011 or 2013. He actually wrote the foreword for my book, and his book has sold over 1 million copies throughout the world, or much more. And when I first started working with him, he had sold less than 10,000, and it's a long haul. Like it took him 3 years to get to maybe 50,000 or 30,000, and then in 2 years ago he went from 300,000 to 500,000 in a year, and then just momentum starts building. Yeah. So that's the other thing. It's just like it's his full-time 24/7 thing that he does and truly believes in, and he has something that really works because it changed my behavior, and which is very unique. But I have the long vision on this, and I have 18 books in me, I think. So we'll see what happens.
Long-term better than short-term. Love that.
Yep.
All right, I think that's it. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
No, I want to thank my mom and my dad for getting this far. I really appreciate it. Michelle, if you did as well, Kelly, my wife, I know you wouldn't get this far, but if you did, I got a special gift for you. I'll do a coupon code for my parents. But thank you, everybody who's listened this far. It really means the world to me. And I really appreciate, Zack, you having me on. Just to me, just the value of talking to you and sharing our message and practicing it with you and going through it and knowing that people will be listening to it is, I'll tell you this. This is how I know I'm doing the right thing in this type of things. I have more energy at the end of this call than I did at the beginning of the call. And that's when you know it. They say when something gives you energy, it's a strength. And when something takes away energy, even if you're good at it, it's a weakness. And so that's why I know sharing this message is the right thing for me.
So let's go on a run.
Let's do it.
So that's my conversation with David. If you guys loved this and you want to see more, well, you could head on over to ffwdmindset.com or just go to the show notes, the description, and it will be there. And make sure you tell David that you loved his conversation here, because it was absolutely incredible. I loved it. Didn't want to end it, but you have to stop at some point. So if you guys loved it, grab his book. And while you're at it, make sure to tell him that you loved this show as well. And that's all I got for you. Thanks for listening. Subscribe. See you next time. Deuces.